All right, let's dive in. Today we're talking about a king who got stuck with, one of the worst nicknames in all of history, William I of Sicily. His 12th century reign was so controversial that he earned the title William the Bad. So the big question is, was he really that bad? Or did he just get some seriously terrible PR? Let's figure it out.
Check this out. This is what people were saying about him the second he became king back in 1154. A man mistrusted, mocked, and soon hated. That's harsh, and it's a reputation that is stuck for centuries. It paints this picture of a ruler that everyone hated. We're not talking about a few grumbles here and there. This was the belief that he was just completely wrong for the job. So yeah, that's really the core question we're tackling today. How in the world does a king get a nickname like the Bad? What do you have to do to earn that? Was he a monster? A total failure as a ruler? Or is there a whole other side to this story we haven't heard? We're going to dig into it and see if we can separate the man from the myth.
Okay, so the popular version of the story, the one that really cemented his nickname, goes something like this. William was lazy, totally obsessed with the luxurious life in his palaces in Palermo, which had this, semi-Muslim influence. The story goes that he just let his corrupt buddies run the kingdom into the ground, ignored all his duties, and if anyone challenged him, he'd just lash out with this vicious, thoughtless cruelty. It's a really simple, powerful image of a terrible king. But, history is almost never that simple. To really get to the bottom of William's reputation, we have to start with a super important question. Who wrote this stuff down? Because we've all heard that history is written by the victors, but what happens when it's written by the losers, who just happen to be better with a pen? And this brings us to this absolutely crucial idea, chronicler bias. See, back then, there wasn't any objective journalism. The person writing everything down had immense power. Their own feelings, their political loyalties, their personal grudges, all of that could totally change how a person was remembered forever. And surprise, surprise, here's the main source for William's terrible reputation, a historian named Hugo Fulcandus. Now, Fulcandus wasn't some neutral observer, not at all. He was openly team rebellious barons, the guys who are constantly in a power struggle with the king. So the main story we have of William's reign, it's written by someone who already hated his guts. Yeah, you can see how that might be a little biased. And boy, did William have a lot of enemies. See, he kept up his father's policy of centralizing power, making the king stronger. And what does that mean? It means taking power away from the feudal barons, and they absolutely hated that. On top of that, he had major powers breathing down his neck from all sides. The Pope in Rome, the Byzantine Empire in the east, the Holy Roman Empire to the north. He was basically surrounded by rivals who were just waiting for him to fail. All of this political heat created, well, a kingdom under siege. William's time as king wasn't just about arguments at court. It was a non-stop fight for survival. From the very second he put on that crown, his kingdom was in a state of crisis. And here's a really important piece of the puzzle. William was never supposed to be king. He was the fourth son of the legendary Roger II. But one by one, all three of his older brothers died. So all of a sudden, this young guy who grew up expecting a totally different life is heir to one of the richest and most complicated kingdoms in Europe. By pretty much every account, he was not ready for this. And just look at this timeline of his first 7 years. It shows you just how much pressure he was under. 1154, he's crowned, and right away the barons start plotting. The very next year, the Byzantine Empire launches a massive invasion. But then in 1156, William actually leads his army to a huge victory at Brindisi and manages to make peace with the Pope. But the crises just keep coming. By 1160, the kingdom loses its territory in Africa and his top minister gets murdered. It all leads up to this insane, violent coup attempt right inside his own home. It was just relentless. And this event, this rebellion in 1161, this is the moment that really sealed his reputation as the Bad. It was bloody, it was personal, and it nearly cost him absolutely everything. So the whole thing kicked off in November of 1160. William's chief minister, Mayo of Berry, who was the guy behind all those unpopular policies and, importantly, wasn't a highborn noble, was assassinated in the streets. The ringleader was a powerful nobleman, Matthew Bonello. But killing the minister, that was just step one. The real target was the king. The coup happened shockingly fast. After they killed Mayo, the conspirators, and this included some of William's own family, stormed the palace. They captured William, his wife, his kids, the whole family. The plan was to put William's young son on the throne and rule through him. But they made a huge miscalculation. The people of Palermo and the army were actually loyal to William. They rose up, fought back, and freed the king. And once he was free, William crushed the rebellion without mercy.
But that victory came with a terrible personal price. During the chaos of the fight to free the royal family, William's 9-year-old son and heir, Roger, was killed. He was most likely hit by a stray arrow. So this wasn't just politics anymore. It was a deep family tragedy. Of course, the Bayerist historian Hugo Falcandus later invented this awful story that William himself kicked his son to death for being faithless, a story that fits the bad king narrative perfectly, but is pretty much contradicted by other sources.
So what happened next is really what earned him his name. William's revenge was brutal. Nobles were blinded, mutilated, killed. The leader, Matthew Bonello, was captured and blinded. Whole families were destroyed. So you have to ask yourself, was this just the work of a bloodthirsty tyrant, like his enemies said? Or was this the calculated, if incredibly harsh, response from a king who had been betrayed by his own kin, thrown in prison, and had just seen his own son and heir killed?
Okay, so this brings us to our final section. Let's weigh all the evidence. We've seen the legend, we understand the political mess he was in, and we've seen the brutality of the rebellion. It's time to put William the Bad on trial. This slide really lays it all out, side by side. On the left, you've got the legend, written by his enemies. He's lazy. But on the right, you have the historical record. He was energetic and decisive, personally leading his army to smash that Byzantine invasion. The legend says he's a hated tyrant. The record shows the people and the army actually fought to save him. The legend focuses on losing Africa, but the record shows he won a major war against a superpower in Italy. The simple villain on the left starts to look a lot more like a complex, effective leader on the right. So, what's the case for William? Well, he beat back a massive invasion. He made peace with the Pope, which was a huge political win. He continued Sicily's amazing tradition of religious tolerance. He put down a rebellion that could have ripped his kingdom into pieces. And maybe the biggest piece of evidence of all, he left a stable, peaceful kingdom to his son, who, ironically, would go down in history as William the Good. You know, a lot of modern historians are starting to see him this way. Not as a bad king, but as a tough, pragmatic ruler who did what he had to do in an impossible situation. And really, that's the big takeaway here. Think about it. William I won. He beat the Byzantines, he beat the barons, he died in his own bed, and he passed a stable kingdom onto his son. By any real measure, he was the victor. But his enemies, those angry nobles, they had Hugo Falcandus. They had the better storyteller. And their version of the story is what gave him that name that stuck for centuries, William the Bad. It really makes you think, doesn't it? It leaves us with this fascinating question about how we remember the past.